All right, good morning, everybody. So today I want to talk about chatbots, and the title of my presentation is Chat/Bot, and the idea is that we're going to be talking about these technologies and looking at them in a way that we can apply them to new user experiences and trying to generate a simpler future for our customers and for our users. So I wanted to come here and talk about chatbots and the surrounding technology today because I really do feel that there's a fundamental shift that they're going to start creating in the way that we deal with our content, the way we deal with our customers, the way we deal with our users. And I think it might be on the order of some of the big shifts we've seen, in our recent lifetime. I think it could be on the order of the internet in and of itself. And I'll talk a little more about that in a few minutes. But I do think it's a really big deal. I think one of the major issues with it is that a lot of people get it wrong, and maybe even more people misunderstand it. And I think some of that misunderstanding comes from the fact that we don't really know what these systems are, and we don't really know how to interact with them yet. We don't have a lot of good examples, and maybe we don't ever take the time to really break them down and think about the component parts so we can get to the whole solution and how that can apply in our world. So one of the things that I think is important about these systems is that they really don't come in one shape and one size. So everyone here probably produces PDF and web content. Well, everybody who produces content probably produces PDF and web content. Now our PDFs may look different and our web help may be structured differently, but in general, those things have a pretty straightforward path to implementation. And I don't think that's the case here. I think that there is a lot more ambiguity in how these things are implemented, and the skill sets and the knowledge behind them. These are all things that are very different. So what I want to do today is I want to take the term chatbot, and you'll notice that there's that weird slash in my presentation title. Why is it chat/bot? And that slash is there because these are two separate things, chat systems and bots. And they come together to make chatbots, but at their core, they're not one single entity, and I want to look at them in separation. So we're going to look at a number of different technologies that come to build up and create chatbot systems. So we're going to look at chat, we're going to look at bots, we're going to look at machine learning, and then we're going to look at the combination of all these things together as chatbot systems. So here are my goals today. One is, especially given the time, to keep this short and sweet. This is a topic that gets very deep very quickly, and I could stand up here and ramble on about it for the rest of the day. Nobody wants me to do that. I'm going to try not to. So the first thing we're going to do is a general what is for machine learning, chat, and bots, and then chatbots. I think it's really important as content professionals that going forward we have a conversational knowledge of what machine learning is and what machine learning isn't. So today I want to give you just enough that you can go and start to explore some of the terminology and some of the things that are involved with machine learning and start to educate yourselves on it a little bit better, because I do think that's really important. I want to talk about the what is of chat and the what is of bots as well, to kind of give my perspective on what those systems are and the way that I look at them. And then how I use those perspectives when we're applying them to actual problems out in the real world where we're building chatbots. As a part of that, I want to actually do a bit of an analysis of the user experience around chat. And that's not just little windows with robot icons in them. And then finally, we're going to talk about implementing chatbots and implementing them at scale. Okay, so first of all, what is machine learning? Machine learning is, in the most concise way possible, it's teaching machines to recognize semantic representations of stuff. So this is a thing that we do really well as human beings, but it's a thing that machines do really, really poorly. So if you look throughout computational history, the ability to understand what something is from a semantic sense and at different levels is something that machines have really struggled with. And the reason that machine learning has become such a big topic in the last, call it 3 to 5 years, is because we started getting a lot better at this. And we started getting a lot better at this in really profound ways, in ways that are now advanced enough that we need to start thinking about them as professionals who are not machine learning professionals. So a little bit of a background on machine learning. It's a subset of AI. Now, one of the things you're going to notice throughout my talk is I'm not going to say AI again once we leave this slide. And there's 2 big reasons for that. One is that, in my opinion, and this is very much an opinion, AI is a marketing term. I don't really think that AI has all that much meaning when it comes to having a discussion about implementation. And as a matter of fact, I think anybody who tells you that it's being done with AI, I think that should immediately trigger a question of, okay, tell me what that means. Because it's such a broad and open and misused is probably the wrong term, but used frequently and liberally, that term. So I think it's a dangerous term. But machine learning has a lot of levels. And when people think about machine learning, I think they're often thinking about like teaching machines to be humans, to understand things the way that we understand things. And that's actually not exactly where machine learning started, but it is probably the most popularized form of machine learning in culture, where they're actually creating software representations of like neurons. But it's actually, turns out, not really the most useful form of machine learning. Machine learning has come a long way, and now we're teaching machines to learn using technology that's more oriented towards what they are, which is machines. And those things are like autoencoders and deep learning and things like that. So machine learning is a big space, and there's a lot of different ways to implement it. It's not necessarily creating computer brains. That's all I really want you to take away from this image. Also, I didn't make this. This is from the machine learning textbook, which if you have a bunch of time and you want to read it, I can get it to you. It's open source. Okay, so what is machine learning good at? It's effectively really only good at 2 things. One is recognition and all the different subsets of recognition. So classification, identification, all those types of things. And then it's getting much better at prediction. So those are, weather is a great example. Fire patterns are a great example. We have a big problem with things being on fire all the time in the United States. So they're applying machine learning to those types of things to predict where those things will go. But recognition is probably the bigger one in terms of what's interesting to us as content creators. So when you think about recognition and machine learning systems, what it really is it's just deciding the isness of something. So what is this? What properties does this have? How do those things come together to form an object? And advanced machine learning systems will be able to take smaller bits of isness and assemble them up into more complete concepts. So let's do an example of that. So think about just a knife, like a kitchen knife. Now, it seems like a really simple thing. I mean, we've had knives for thousands of years, and most human beings can pretty intuitively use a knife. You kind of know this is the blade, this is the handle. That seems pretty intuitive. But to a computer, it is a really difficult problem, because how do you grab it? As a computer doesn't have the innate knowledge that we have around, like, I want to eat something and I want it to be small enough to put in my mouth. Therefore, I'm going to use the sharp part to turn it into a smaller piece. They don't have that background, that semantic knowledge and usefulness. So part of what needs to be done there is that machine learning is the ability to just teach a computer that the handle is a handle, and that in some knives it's going to be rounder, in some knives it's going to be longer, in some knives it's going to be just a non-bladed part of a piece of metal. All of these things are things that are very, very easy for us to recognize, but are very complex things for machines to recognize. And then, of course, you can go into the idea of bigger and smaller knives. Flatter knives are better or less sharp knives are better for butter. Sharper knives are better for cutting certain things. There's a huge amount of semantic information around this incredibly simple thing that we use every day. And getting machines to the point where they're able to make those recognitions of those objects is a really big step forward, and the things that we're just now breaking. From a content perspective, it's going to be more like, is this a procedure? What type of procedure is this? Is this a troubleshooting procedure? Those types of things. So there's a lot of semantic isness in our content that we need to start thinking about. So let's do a quick example of how machine learning works. I didn't make this up. This is from the Machine Learning 101 class you could find online. I'm going to do this quickly. So these are 3 flowers, and there's a machine learning application that just classifies these flowers. There are 3 different versions of this flower. So what we have here is we have a table, and this table relates to the different parts of this flower. So you have sepal length, sepal width, petal length, petal width, species, and the species are 1, 2, 3 in order like that. So what's been done here is that through a process of image recognition, these flowers have effectively been turned into numbers. And numbers are something that machines are much better at. So when we're thinking about how we look at machine learning systems, we have to remember that machines don't do a good job of thinking about things in the way that we do. They do a much better job of thinking about things in terms of numbers. So what this has done is it's taken these qualities, the isness of these flowers, how long are these different pieces, and then it's put them into a system where they're just numerical. And through having 120 rows in this table, a machine learning system is able to correctly identify these different flowers with above 95% accuracy. So it's a very small sample size, and it gets you a very high accuracy. And I think that's a really interesting example, because one of the things that's always been very difficult about machine learning, especially if you're not a big company, is that getting access to enough data to get to a place where you can actually have good accuracy is difficult. And it's something that we need to be thinking about. But this example shows that when you set your problems up correctly, you can get to decent recognition with smaller sample sets. And I think getting to a sample set of several hundred is something that's reasonable for almost everybody in here with content, whereas getting to sample sets of thousands or millions, which is where most machine learning implementations are, is more difficult. So that's why I like this example. Okay, so that's the basic introduction I wanted to do to machine learning. We'll come back to some of those concepts in a bit. So next I want to just talk about what bots are. So that's the second half of this word, obviously, chatbots. So bots, from my perspective, are really just systems that replace things that humans do. And in almost all cases, these are repetitive things. And they can be very small things, and they can be very large things. And as we start to look at the requirements we're going to have going forward as content creators and content deliverers, we're going to need to start employing bots on a very broad scale, because the requirements on how much content we provide and in the formats we provide them in, due to these new systems of chat and conversational UX, are going to go up a lot. So when thinking about a bot, it's basically a software application, and this is my opinion, that goes in this order. It recognizes something, it makes a decision about it, and then it performs some type of an action. Now, there we go. So the thing about this recognition is that it doesn't have to be machine learning, but you're now seeing that these things kind of build on each other, right? So machine learning systems are really good at recognizing. They can be the first step in a bot. They can be the first part of this application that's designed to go out and have an end result. So you can take recognition, you can feed it into logical systems, which would be the decision part of it, and then in the end, it can go out and it can perform some type of an action. So for us, this could be publishing content, it could be alerting us to something, it could be taking some analytics that we've gathered and sending those to the right people. There's all kinds of bits of information in our workflows and in the processes that we have that are being done by human beings. People go and they look at the analytics and they analyze them, and then they make some type of a decision on them, and based on that, they're going to go and have some effect. Well, a lot of those things, when they get really repetitive, those are things we can automate, and we can write bots to do those. And they can be very, very targeted. You could be looking at a graph, and you could realize every single time I come in and I see this graph touch 90%, I have to go and tell Jane over in accounting that we have to go and implement a new cost for a server upgrade or something like that, or we have to go and purchase another license for our publishing system. And you could create a bot that would go and have that recognition and then kick off that workflow. There's no reason that you need to be sending that email to Jane. So when you start to look at all the things that are on our plates, if you get into this mindset where I recognize something and make a decision about it, the decision is consistent, I take some very consistent action, that is the first step in identifying places that we can automate things with purpose-built bots. And this has become a really big industry. So you see a lot of companies out there they're almost devoted to just doing this. Now they're going to call it robotic process automation or RPA, but in the end, they're just bots. So I think that this is something that's worth thinking about and having in the back of our minds as we're doing our jobs. Okay, that's bots. So now what is chat? So I broke chat out because, I think we all have a different perspective on what chat is. But in my opinion, chat is just the ability to interact with the computer in a more conversational way. I actually prefer the term conversational user experience. It's not as catchy, so I think we'll probably keep saying chat. But really, when I'm saying chat, I'm thinking in the back of my head, this is a conversational user experience. And it can be delivered through a text window that we're typing into. It can be delivered through a little dot or whatever home thing we put in our house that we talk to. But both of these things they're chat. We're interacting with a computer in a way that's much more along the lines of the way we're used to interacting with people, which is through conversation. The other big thing that I want to really take away from this is that chat is not a software, it's not a system, it's just a user interface. It's just a method of attaching another system. So the big reason I wanted to break chat and bot out, so we talked and thought about those differently, is because when we're thinking about these chatbot projects, I want to think about the user interface, which is the chat part, and then I want to think about the back end, which is the bot part. We don't have to all go and build machine learning systems to get the thing we need for the back end, for the bot part. Some of us do. But if we're analyzing those things separately, it allows us to have that conversation with our colleagues in a way that's going to be much more informed and I think much more productive. So as you go back to wherever you work and you think about these chatbot systems, I think it's a really important point that you don't think about a chatbot, you think about a conversational user experience, and then you think about how you're going to hook that up to the functionality you're looking to provide. Okay, so we've gone through what these things are. Let's talk about what chatbots are now that we put them together. So before I kind of dive into why I think these things are really important, there are a couple of key concepts and some technical things that I want to go through. And again, this is kind of in the same vein as to why I just put some flowers up for machine learning, is that I want to just give you guys some conversational tools at a base level for chatbot systems. So I think there's really three primary concepts that you have to have in the back of your mind when you're thinking about chatbot systems. And those are the idea of intents, the idea of entities, and just some basic understanding of what NLP or natural language processing is. So, intents. Intents in a chatbot system are the different pieces of functionality or the different answers the chatbot can provide back to users. What you're going to see in almost all chatbot systems is that these are either laid out to you in a list or they're laid out to you in some type of a graph workflow. But they're kind of the matching, the things that can match to what a user asks you to do. And they can be templatized, so they can be very general, or they can be very specific. So it can be one question, or it can be a lot of questions in a specific intent. But the important thing here is really getting the root of the word intent. It's a thing that a user wants that a chatbot system recognizes. So that means that I ask it a question, and it's not going to be an exact question, but the chatbot system, through the use of training through machine learning, is supposed to be able to take that string that I'm asking it and produce an interpretation of my intent, and then match that to something it may or may not be able to do. So that's what intents are. Entities are much more straightforward. They're basically just nouns. So it's a list of, this is fruits, and maybe all of your fruit entities are apples, oranges, and bananas. And they're important inside of these systems because they're part of what the chatbot uses to kind of hinge onto different things. So if you publish all of your different product names in there, your chatbot is going to really strongly understand your different product names. When it sees them in requests and intents, it can use those in a way that are very useful. So when you go and you start looking at these systems, getting a taxonomy of entities put together is oftentimes going to be one of your first steps. And it's one you cannot skip. So it may be simple, it may be something you've already done, it'd be great if you've already done it, but you can't skip it. So you absolutely have to have your entities well thought out and well defined as you're going in and looking at building one of these things. Okay, so lastly, much more conceptually, we have natural language processing. So I think one of the things that's really hard for people to wrap their head around in chatbots is that it's not search, but it's kind of like search. And the way that I like to think about it is that search is a system that forces human beings to act like computers. I think everybody in here does it, especially all the millennials in the room. When we go to a search box, we don't talk like a human being anymore. We go and we put in a set of keywords that we think are going to give us the best chance of a computer going and getting and bringing something back to us. Now, this is getting better. Google's getting a little more conversational, but especially those of us who started with Google and when we were teenagers, we punch stuff in there that you never say to a human being. The machines have taught us to be like them. It's really, that's the paradigm. We're in their world. Whereas search, when you turn and you add natural language processing, it's flipping the script. So what it is now is trying to take the things we're asking them and turn them into understanding, but still kind of with a search indexing process. So the machines are now understanding our terminology, and what they're looking for is the intent that we have in matching that, as opposed to matching our actual words. And I think that that is also an important paradigm. So you put these things together, and this is kind of the middleware for a chatbot system. So what do these look like from an architecture perspective? My perspective is that any chatbot system is going to have 4 major components, or any sufficiently scalable chatbot system is going to have 4 major components. You're going to have a user experience, could be a window, could be a voice interface. You're going to have the chatbot engine, which is a middleware, and that is going to contain those technologies that we just talked about in the previous slide. You're going to have a content source. This is where your content comes from. So any content you put into the chatbot system, ideally the content source is not Bill from the TechPubs team copy and pasting into your chatbot system. That is a lot of people's content source. That's not scalable. Better off that this is a component content management system, or it's something else that is structural in terms of either being a database system or a structured content system. And then finally, you're going to have a fulfillment backend. And this is what's going to allow you to answer very intricate logical-based questions. And we'll take a look at what this looks like in a minute. Okay, so why are conversational interfaces so interesting right now? I think there's 3 major reasons for this. First of all, chat is a universal interface for people. And this has some really serious implications. When we deploy software, we deploy functionality for people to use inside of our current paradigm. It's an app, it's an application, it's any of those things, but it has a GUI. It has a system that you have to go and learn how to use in order to get the functionality that you want. But chat isn't like that. Chat is the ability to go and interact with software systems without training, without learning a GUI, without the limitations of how many buttons you can fit onto a screen, any of that user interface design. Now, don't get me wrong, there is user interface design. It's just very different. It's content and conversational design. But the reality is that this does something really important for the user, and it does something really important for the developer. For the user, what it means is that they can go and interact with these things simply using their words or their text or whatever that may be, and it can connect to just about anything. So in the back end, it can deliver you information, it can do stuff, it can connect to other systems, it has all those capabilities. For the developer, it means that you can go and incrementally deploy functionality to your users every single time that you can create a new intent and attach it to something. And that's huge. So the first time that we put together a prototype internally for a chatbot system, we showed it off we do a Friday meeting where everybody in the company attends and anybody who wants to show off something they've done is allowed to. So we were showing this off, and we ended up with like 15 minutes of, hey, could it do this? Hey, could it do this? Could it create a document? Could it create a support ticket? Could it run this search for me? Could it run this report? Every single time the answer was yes. That this little chat interface could effectively replace all the different buttons in our software, not all of them, but a lot of them if we wanted to. And in some cases, it was going to be a better experience. So the fact that these can be really universal in what they're able to do is really big, and you should be thinking about that when you're going and working with them, which has a whole aspect of cross-disciplinary teams and all those types of things. Chat can go anywhere. So this is enormous. This is a really, really big point. So if you build a chat system, you can deploy it to Google Assistant. You can deploy it to these technologies that are already with us. And what that means is that you're able to go and design a system in an incremental, agile fashion, and then you could deploy it to every single person in this room instantaneously. And if your intent was the one that Google matched when somebody said, okay, Google, find me information on chatbots, if you had deployed an intent that was called information on chatbots, Google would go and get that, and it would provide that to your user, and that's your user interface now. But beyond that, these are going to be everywhere. So right now, you have no way of deploying content to someone who's driving. With a chat system, you now have the ability to take and deploy micro content, hopefully derived from your current content, to someone who's actually doing something else. They could be under a tractor repairing it. They could be driving. They could be flying. We've had a presentation on that and how those things are being delivered. But it doesn't matter what your user is doing anymore, because you can do almost anything you're doing and you can have a conversation with something. So chat can be everywhere all at once. And the implications of this are huge. At least I think they are. And finally, chat gets you closer to your user. So there's no like, oh, I have to go into this other thing. I've got to go open up the PDF. I've got to go into the web help or whatever that may be. Because chat can be deployed into our software, it can be deployed into our cars, it can be deployed onto our smartwatches, you are now one step away from your user, which is a place that most technical content creators have never been before. And that's really big for a number of reasons. One is it means that we can deliver a lot more value. But the other one is that it means that we can get a lot more data. And you remember when we were talking about machine learning about 15 minutes ago, one of the big things that's difficult is getting enough data to make machine learning work. So if we're able to be one step away from our user, that means that we are actually interacting with their interactions, which means that we can get data from that. So this gives us the ability to get to our user in a way that we can start to build stores of data that we can then feed into systems to improve experiences. So just for that reason alone, this is something that I think you should be thinking about. So there is a problem with these systems, and this is the misunderstanding part. I'm going to try to go through this quickly because I know that I'm not over time, but I'm kind of getting there. So the common view of chatbots has been that you can go and you can dump a bunch of content into it, and there are these fancy wizards who are going to figure it all out, and then we're going to have a chatbot. So the CEO or whatever comes down and says, we need a chatbot. I just read about it in CEO magazine. And you're like, well, how do we do that? And he's like, well, I'm going to buy Watson. And then you're going to put all our content into it. And it's like, okay, well, that's great. And then Watson's like, I don't know. And, like $10 million later, you've got a system that doesn't really do anything and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I know no one's ever experienced any of that. So what happens? Well, this happens. So then we go and we put a person in between the chatbot and the massive content that we have. And they now have to manage the chatbot system either in lists or in graphs. And as we all know, this doesn't scale. So this is not a whole lot better. It can be used in some small situations, but it's not going to be one that's going to be long-lasting. So the real answer to this is to get back to having a more sustainable model where you're not going in and managing the content directly. You've built publishing systems that do this. And we've all been doing this. We do it with PDF. We do it with our web content. We're all experts at single sourcing content. So, I know that this is kind of a boring conclusion, but single sourcing is the solution once again to doing this correctly and doing it scalably. So you need to have your content and your processes in such a situation where you're deriving all of your outputs, including your chat output, which is going to be more complicated, from a single source. And don't fall into that trap of, we can just go, we'll put this and then we'll draw a line to it over here. When somebody says no, we'll put it over here. Because those graph-based systems have a place, they're middleware, but you cannot maintain your content, you cannot maintain your interactions in those. And this gets down to something that I'm calling Scalability 2.0. So the first round of scalability for the information technology industry was the ability to just deliver things. It's system scalability. Could you have your users connect to your website? Could you hold enough gigabytes of content? How fast was your processor? But Scalability 2.0 is going to be interactive scalability. So now we've gotten to the point where we can deliver as many bytes as we want, as fast as we want, to as many people as we want. That's table stakes. But we still haven't figured out a way to deliver the interactions to people that we really want. And these technologies are the key to unlocking that. And content professionals are the key to using these technologies. So the people in this room, the people who really come to understand the intricacies of how machine learning can be used to build up into these chat systems and then deployed in a really equitable way are the key to this new level and new type of scalability that is now going to define the winners and losers when it comes to the ability to communicate with and interact with our customers. So when you're thinking about where your job is going, your job is going to be to go and take these systems and make them scalable. And let's look at one quick example of why that's so different in this particular situation. So I don't know how many people here are familiar with DITA. DITA has this thing called the spec. And the spec contains about, give or take, 500 or 600 different elements that can be combined into DITA topics. Now, if you were to go and to write an FAQ for every single one of those DITA elements that can go into another DITA element, and then you did it for each one of these interactions. So let's see here. Valid child interaction. Is paragraph a valid child of body? Valid children interaction. What valid children, or what can go into a body? Valid location. Where can I put a paragraph? Those three interactions, if you were to create the content for each one of those in a way that you published it, would represent well over 1 million different published outputs. There's no way you can do it. It's not possible. It's not maintainable. And then you have another issue here too, in that that's only the positive interactions. You also have all the interactions where the things are not allowed. So if you scale it out to that, it's even more of these things. So what we have here is this is actually a snapshot of a chat system. We were talking about the fulfillment backends before. So as much as we're going to be publishing content, we also need to think about how we're analyzing content. That's going to be a big part of how these things can scale out. So these different interactions, when combined with a strong logical backend and structured content, we have 3 interactions here, and they can answer millions of different question combinations in a really accurate way. So I know that that's a really high-level version of this, but the notion here is that on a publishing level, these things the scale of these things they're at a completely different level. It's something that we've never dealt with before. Some people here, some organizations here have tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of topics, but the balloon effect of going to interactions is massive. So you really have to think about how that's going to fit into an architecture and how you're going to come to be able to deploy that in a way that's going to be sustainable and scalable in the long term. Okay, so I've got just a couple more points and then I'm done. So systems that scale, the systems that scale are the ones that connect people's effort without connecting those people. You can't scale out support to match every time someone has a small question, and you can't write every interaction. You have to find a way to automate those things. And put it another way, people just don't scale as effectively as machines do. So in the places where we need to get high scalability, where it's quick interactions, it's these small bits of content, it's these small logical decisions, we have to build these into machines if we're really going to get to the point where we had the type of delivery that is going to provide the experience that people are going to come to expect. So my recommendations, after this talk, if this is interesting to you, is to go and learn some basics of machine learning. What I gave you here is obviously not going to be enough. It's not sufficient. It's supposed to just be a starter. Play with the chatbot. I did a quick workshop on it yesterday. We didn't get to play with them, but anybody who wants to know what we would have done if we did have a chance to play with them is welcome to come and see me. They're not that hard. They're not that intimidating to play with. So they're a very approachable technology from that perspective. The scaling part of it, obviously more difficult, but just getting something that will have a fun conversation with you is not that hard. I encourage you to do it. And then finally, you really need to start thinking about acquiring and storing data, because it really is the key to understanding your user and providing them the experience they're going to want. You need to do this sooner rather than later. So when you're starting to think about these systems, make analytical data a priority and make sure that it's something that you can acquire and you can work with for your customers. And obviously, in a moral way, don't be, doing things that, there's a lot of rules and regulations around this, no PII and those types of things. But taking interactions and turning them into data that can then be used for better interactions is going to be really necessary. In the end, I just want everyone to remember that this is not the apocalypse that's going to take all of our jobs. This is never going to be people or machines. It's going to be people and machines. There is a very necessary role for both of us in this, but as we move forward, it's going to be necessary that it's people and machines. This is going to be a core skill set, even for people who are writers. You're going to have to understand this stuff. So I encourage you to start today. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Do we have questions?
Hello. You mentioned Google Assistant for chatbot.
There you are. Okay, hi.
You mentioned Google Assistant for chatbot configuring, and you also know about their presentation about table booking service with a voice chatbot. And what do you think about the future of chatbots? Maybe in the future there will be a client who is calling by a chatbot in the restaurant, and in the restaurant there is a chatbot who is answering the calls. And maybe it will be not human and machines, it will be machines and machines.
So
is it what we really need for customer centricity?
Well, so I guess I would ask you, how interesting is it to answer calls and book tables for people? That seems like a thing that maybe should be automated. It's faster that way. I don't think it's a really strong use of human intelligence and cognition and those types of things. And I think those are the right things to automate. We've done very well of automating a lot of the manual labor that we don't want to do. Now we're automating some of the process and simple thinking labor that we don't want to do. And you're absolutely right. In those cases, it's going to be heavily machine-based there, but you're still making the call or sending the text, right? Or whatever that may be.
Yes, and what about decision making by chatbots? Is it possible to complicated problems or something else make a decision? Is it possible for chatbots?
I guess it. So this
Difficult
gets really
decision.
philosophical. So every year we go to tea time Friday after soap, and I will have had a couple of beers by 7:30, and you should ask me that question again.
Thanks.
And then I'm sure I'm going to give you a really, really long-winded answer, and you'll find an excuse to get away from me.
Okay.
But on a basic level, it's possible for them to make decisions. There's a lot of moral ambiguity around it, and I think when done carefully, it can make sense. And we can talk more about what carefully means.
Thank you.
I still believe even if it is about machines to machines, it still would be for people, for us.
Right. So, one of the things that I think people forget, and she said, just to recap that, if you didn't hear her, even if it's machines to machines, it's for people. I agree with you completely. So, machines don't have desires. Now, there's some people that think maybe we should build desires into machines in some way, but the reality is, at the end of the day, that machines are still this thing that we put together to fulfill a thing that we want. So as long as we think about how we get machines to fulfill those wants, there's not this ability for them to have like moral reasoning so they can go out and make decisions that are not things that we built and decided that they should be making decisions about. So I think that the kind of the machines take over apocalypse thing is, I mean, we should watch out for it, I guess, but like I don't think it's very likely. Whatever Elon Musk says.
Okay, everyone, that was the last question or comment, really. Patrick, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.